Alright, for this video, I mentioned something this week in the video about defense and restricted terrain, about planting shape charges in the road to detonate underneath heavy armored vehicles to take them out. And this is what I'm talking about. This was something that has appeared through history. It's been in U.S. doctrine. I've come across references in it when reading on the Vietnam War. Now, the United States issues two types of shape charges. A 5-pound shape charge, which is really meant for putting holes in ships. Most people are not aware of that. That's what it was designed for. Was for attaching to the hull of the ship so that it would breach it. So it was something that was designed for SEALs or frogmen to use. The most common type that I used was the 40-pound shape charge, like this, the M3 series. And looking at the numbers on this one, this is actually, that's in a museum, and that one's actually newer than any of the ones I actually used. Most of the stuff I used was from like the 1940s, 1960s. It's stuff that, you know, should have been destroyed years ago. But it still worked. In case you've been wondering what I'm doing, I'm drinking soda every once in a while to clear my throat because I'm dealing with a respiratory infection. I'm almost over it. But the 40-pound shape charge, the bottom of it is down here. This is the top. This is where the cap well is. On the bottom of this is a copper cone where the jet forms. The copper actually helps with melting its way through the target. It acts like a slug when it's being fired into the ground. If you're firing it into armor, it helps heat it and push its way through. It's part of, I know I had read about this a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, probably closer to 20. Something called the Misny-Sheridan effect, if I remember correctly, where you have explosive that'll heat the target, then a copper plate, and then more explosive. And it was found that that initial explosive heats your target. This copper plate pushes its way through with the additional explosive giving additional force. You would get better holes. You'd be able to penetrate especially armored materials a lot more easily. Now these stands, like you see on this, are a separate piece. They get put on using this little thumb screw on the side here when you place them over the ground. This gives you the recommended distance for use over asphalt. That's what it was designed for. If you're using a shape charge against dirt, it's supposed to be farther up off the ground. The harder the material you're trying to breach, the closer it's supposed to be. The looser the material, the farther away. And all that stuff can be found in FM 5-34 Engineer Field Data, or its newer version, which I believe is FM 3-34. So that gives you a little bit of background on how this kind of works. Now, these can only be primed and detonated one way, and that is with a blasting cap inside the cap well, which is dead center on the charge. So even if it's a homemade shape charge, it has to be detonated the same way. If you try setting it off any other way, it won't work. What you basically have then is a giant bulk explosive charge. You're not going to get that jet to form in order to breach its target. Now, this obviously was used in high explosive anti-tank warheads, heat warheads. So for your bazooka, your Panzerfaust, your Panzerschreck, and was later incorporated into RPGs and all that stuff, and anti-tank guided missiles. This technology, or which is really simple, has been incorporated into anti-tank mines, which are designed for going off underneath the vehicle itself, underneath the body, not necessarily under the wheel or the track. So a lot of those anti-tank mines will have a tilt rod. Now, the VC, as I've mentioned in the past, would steal from U.S. depots. They would get in through tunnels, get in there, steal what they needed or what they wanted, what they could get a hold of. They would do that every night, every other night, once a week, whatever it was, depending on the size of the depot. The larger the depot, the more stuff you could steal without it being noticed by the security forces or the troops that were working that depot. And really it comes down to, when you're doing it like that, you're either taking off a small amount where someone's not going to notice it missing from the stack. They may figure that it wasn't accounted for properly the day before, or they're making an entire pallet to disappear, to include the pallet itself, so that if someone shows up, they'll figure, well, it's been picked up, it's been moved, or whatever, it's just gone. They would not leave a pallet sitting there with, say, half the pallet remaining. They would take the entire damn thing. Or if it was a partial pallet, they would take a few off of it so it would not be noticed. They would steal the 5-pound and 40-pound cratering charges. One of the things that they did with them, the 5 pounds they used as off-trail mines, packing them with nails and rocks. They use them as improvised claymores against U.S. troops, and you can guess the type of effect a shape charge going off down a trail on unarmored troops, what the effect would be. An explosive jet going flying down right into the bodies of U.S. troops. Basically, you're thinking of like a laser weapon strike from science fiction is kind of what you're going to end up with. Now, the 40-pounders, they figured out, could be placed in roadways and used against tanks. So, you plant them in the road upside down so the cone is facing upward. You have it just a little bit below the surface, maybe an inch or so, maybe 2 inch. They would put a cover over the top of this, which would probably be some type of grass matting, maybe a piece of cardboard, some thin wood, whatever was available, to try to keep dirt and crap from falling down into the cone here, decreasing the effects. When they were putting it in the ground, they would prime it. Now, typically with the Viet Cong, they would use electric initiation, so electric blasting caps. They would prime it, put it in the ground, fit it in the hole, cover it, and then bury it. They would then conceal the blasting wire going off to the side of the road. Go back to their ambush position, hook it up to their firing device. When the Allied tank would go over the top of it, roughly in the center, or at least over when the troop compartment, the crew area, was directly over the top of the shape charge, they would detonate it. It would detonate, breach the bottom of the tank, which is the most thinly armed or armored location on a tank. It would breach right into the crew compartment, killing everyone inside. And it would potentially set fire to the vehicle also. It's a pretty effective way of doing this. Now, I know someone's probably going to ask me, well, how do we make a shape charge, because I don't have access to military issue 40-pound shape charges. Can it be done? Yes. Making shape charges are actually pretty damn easy. I do not have my book with me that gives me the dimensions and stuff, but there is a formula to it that tells you how deep the cone has to be. I do remember that the distance, your height on the side, needs to also be the depth in the center. So it needs to be equal. So this is the shape of the cone on a 40 pounder. The shape of the cone inside will pretty much mirror that. Except I know because of looking inside them, it doesn't have this little cap on top. It actually just comes to a point up inside there. So the diameter of your shape charge determines your height. And then in the calculation, I don't remember what it is, if it's equal to or half or what it was, of that diameter determines the depth, which would give you the angle for your cone. Now, are there flat-topped ones where this part here wouldn't exist? It's just this area here? Yes, that's what you see in landmines. There is a VC shape charge landmine. I want to get more of the specifics on how it was constructed. I have seen it being constructed in videos. I want to get more info on it. I want to get the info on the materials and all that stuff. How did they put it together, the general dimensions, that type of thing. And the general shape of the cone itself. It may not be just a cone like this, it might be more rounded. Because I have seen that with, I think it's the US M21 has more of a rounded area here for inside the shape charge. The M21 is a shape charge that gets, the M21 heavy anti-tank mine is a shape charge that gets buried in the road or in a field with a tilt rod for the vehicle to drive over the top to go off underneath. So I mentioned, I'll mention this quick. In the video I mentioned that the Green Mountain Militia, the shape charges they put in that dirt road going to LZ South were homemade shape charges using very little metal content. The reason for that is the Husky and other vehicle mounted mine detection systems, VMADs, such as the Meerkat. They detect metal. Now, something that the Iraqi insurgents figured out, which isn't a surprise, if the explosive content is inside a non-metallic container, it was not as likely to be found by the Husky. So, if the only metal you use is the blasting cap itself, the chances of it being picked up by a VMAD system is pretty low. So then, you're probably wondering, well, I'm making or going to make a shape charge to use against the enemy invader. What can I use as a container since I can't use a metal shell like on a 40-pound cratering charge? It's pretty easy when you think about it. Think of your plastic buckets. That would work, wouldn't it? Use that as your outside casing and then try to come up with some type of material for your cone on it. And people that are rather ingenious can probably think of something that'll work pretty damn easily. And then you're probably wondering, well, what about the copper plate? That's metal. That would be detected. Potentially. It's non-ferrous. So it's not magnetic, which means it's not as likely to get picked up by a VMAD system, but it depends on the sensitivity of the VMAD. You could always get around that by just using a larger shape charge and subtracting that copper plate. And yes, it has to be copper. Copper or bronze, I think, is what I actually seen in a book, but I know that copper is the most common because it's a lot lighter. So there, I've given you a considerable amount of information on how to do this and how it was used. As I said, this is mentioned in U.S. doctrine and stuff going back to the Cold War for use against Warsaw Pact forces if or when they invaded Western Germany. So it's a recognized technique. It's a pretty easy technique, and you can take out a very large tank, a 60 or 70 class tank with one of these things pretty damn easily. So now, for all my engineer brothers and the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.